the metric system down. We do. We do. Who keeps Atlantis off the maps? Who keeps the Martians under wraps? We do. We do. Who holds back the electric car? Who makes Steve Gutenberg a star? We do.
You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. This is episode 33, the much coveted and awaited Mason episode. Insert spooky music.
Bum, bum, bum.
And with me is Lobo, my Chewbacca to Han Solo. I'm still not even saying that right, am I?
I'm a Wookiee?
I could be Han Solo. Well, no, you can be Han Solo. I could be the Wookiee.
Would that make you a bear?
I don't know. I know where you're going with that joke.
No, that's fine. No,
because bear is slang for a fat gay man, which is what I'm not. But
well, I hope not. Well, I mean, even if you were, you'd have some explaining to do to your wife. But whatever.
Oh yeah. Wow. What a way to derail the beginning of the show.
This is me trying to push off this. No, just kidding.
But yeah, this is episode 33. And it was funny. I was thinking about this week. When we first started talking about doing the show, one of us made the joke, hey, when episode 33 hits, we should do that about Masons. And at the time, it was hysterical. Then as more and more time went by and episode 33 started approaching, we decided, yeah, let's actually do a show about Freemasons. Mm-hmm. And it stuck. Well, let's get some house clean out of the way real quick. Lisa, congratulations on being a future mommy. I need to thank Aaron and Dave for donating to the show. I'm not sure if I thanked them or not yet, but I'm making sure that I thank them this time. They donated some money to the show, and we appreciate it.
Nice.
So, yeah, what we're going to do in this show, if you're here looking for conspiracy theories, if you're here looking for these people are out to rule the world, you're not going to get that here. This episode is going to be treating this topic with more respect than I think it gets through most of these kinds of shows like ours. And that's because you are a Mason.
I am indeed.
I am not a Mason. I'm curious about Masons, but I'm not really interested in becoming one. But we're not going to talk about Freemasons ruling the world and secret societies behind the scenes. We're going to talk about the history of what Masons are, some of the things they do in public. We're not going to be talking about rituals because it's just not that important. And to be honest with you, if you want to find that stuff, you just type in and Google Freemasonry rule the world, Freemason rituals.
You even have to go that far. I mean, a few years ago, somebody decided that they no longer wanted to be part of the brotherhood, and they said, you know what, screw you, I'm going to tell everybody everything. You got to wonder whether or not they joined just to find out. They put all of our handshakes up, they put all of our rituals up, they put up all of our words, all of our sayings. They went above and beyond to try and destroy the Masons, and all it did was intrigue more people. So it kind of had
it had the exact opposite effect. Yeah, and that's, again, that's just not what we're going to do here, because we have a lot of listeners of the show. It's like I was talking to you about earlier. Once we announced that we were going to do this kind of show and how we were going to do it, a lot of the listeners that we know that are Masons have sent me letters through Facebook and messages and stuff saying, hey, thank you. We're looking forward to the show. We're glad that somebody's, taking a really good look at this. We're not going to talk about the rituals and stuff because it's just really not that important. It's like, it's like learning how to be a Catholic. It's the history behind what being a Catholic is kind of more important than what the rituals themselves are. That's kind of secondary to the history about what it is and what you're actually standing for. Hopefully, maybe after this, if somebody's interested, the Masons have a motto, and that motto is
to be one, ask one.
Exactly. So maybe you'll hear about this, and if your curiosity's piqued and you want to go out and
go to your closest lodge. Go to your closest lodge, walk in, and ask for an application.
So go ahead and start us off with the very beginnings of what Freemasonry is.
Well, there's a lot of speculation as to where Freemasonry started. There is a lot of hearsay and conjecture. The modern Masons that are around today, which I'm a part of, which a few of the members of our fan page was started in the late 16th to early 17th century. That's as far back as you can go. Now you'll get some people that say that, you know, we were around since the dawn of time and that we've been around since the first stonemasons laid their
Solomon's
hands
Temple.
upon. Exactly. Now that some of the information that we follow may or may not deal with those origins, but it's not where we came from. We sprung up during the 16th and 17th century. Now, that's not to say that people that were originally part of a guild, which I'm going to get into in a second, weren't earlier than that, because there are two different kinds of masons. There are actual stonemasons and there are speculative masons. An actual stonemason is someone who is a mason and that is their trade. A speculative mason is what the Freemasons are. In the terms of an actual mason, there are three levels of a mason. There is an apprentice, which is someone who's just starting off. There is a journeyman, who is someone who has time behind them and is a competent mason. And then there is a master mason, who is someone who would run the trestle board, delegate work, allocate labor. That would be a master mason.
And these are all based off of what actual stonemasons were considered for the actual trade of stonemasonry.
That's what I'm covering right at the moment. Yeah,
okay.
It is that is what an actual mason does. If a person walks in and they're just learning, they want to know how to cut stone, how to lay stone, how to quarry stone, that would be someone who would be considered an apprentice. A journeyman or a fellow craft would be someone who has done it for a few years, X amount of years, 5, 10, 15 years. And then a master mason would be someone who has learned how to make the columns, has learned how to cut stone, lay stone, make a keystone, make an arch. That would be what a master mason would be considered in the actual trade of masonry. Now, a Freemason, there are similar degrees. There's an apprentice, who's someone who's just learning how to be a mason. There is a fellow craft or a journeyman, who is someone who has a little bit of time in, who knows a little bit about Masonic history and information. And then there's the master mason, who is someone who has gone through the rigors of learning what masons are. So that would be the branch of a speculative mason. The masons in general borrowed a lot of, I don't want to say borrowed because that sounds like we grabbed from. We didn't. There were people that were actual masons that had a certain creed that they lived by. And then there were people that wanted to live by that creed but knew nothing of laying stone. And they wanted to adopt the morals and ideals that the actual masons had. And that was where the birth of Freemasonry came from. What,
to your knowledge, is the creation of the first actual lodge? And what is a lodge?
The first actual lodge? The first lodge, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, was I believe it was the Grand Lodge of England, or the United Grand Lodge of England, because there were two other lodges beforehand. There was a Grand Lodge Scotland and a Grand Lodge Ireland. And then there was the United Grand Lodge. And the Grand Lodge is the one, think of it as like a Sam's Club. Okay. Sam's Club has all the stuff that Walmarts carry, right? So Sam's Club would be the Grand Lodge. The Grand Lodge is your main hub. Like we have the Lodge for the state of Connecticut. The Grand Lodge for state of Connecticut is about a quarter mile up the street from me. Now, my lodge is the next town over. Each lodge has its own group, its own members, and then they report back to the Grand Lodge, and then the Grand Lodge reports back to the district. The first lodges were over in England. Or not England, but Europe in general. But it was England that was the lodges rose up out of. And they, of course, came here because we came here from England.
I joined the Freemasons before it was trendy. That's my eyeball on the dollar bill. That's also my period.
So when they first started forming the actual Freemasonry lodges, essentially what it was is essentially just a bunch of stonecrafters that were coming together. The term you have is, I believe it's something about dedicated and free or something along those lines?
Ancient Free and Accepted Masons, AFAM.
Okay, what's the origins behind that, and how does that tie into the original formation of the lodge?
Ancient Free and Accepted Masons was just a way for people that were born free to be allowed into the lodge. If you weren't born free, and that didn't matter where you came from, if you weren't born free, you were not an accepted member of the lodge.
So from that point, then it became more or less a fraternity with your laws and regulations and your beliefs based in stonemasonry, literally, but based in stonemasonry, correct?
Yeah.
And that's where you get your symbols for your compass and your
tools, our working tools, yeah.
And that's where you get
compass.
Your symbology from.
Yes. That's where there are a set of tools that are synonymous with the Masons, is square and compass.
Okay.
Our symbol, the square and compass with the letter G in the center, that's our symbol.
All right. Well, since we're talking about the birth of the Freemasonry, then I guess this would be a good time to bring up the legend and the origins of the secret handshakes and the passwords and things like that, because this is where they actually had their origins. It came from. So with the secret handshakes, that was, correct me if I'm wrong, a way for a Mason worker when he was done building a temple or a bridge or something like that. If there was out of work, he could go to another town. And if he were to run into another foreman, say from another site, the handshakes and the passwords would be a way to let that foreman know that you were a member of the Freemasons, correct? Is that how it was?
It was a way to let them know that you were a Mason, not a Freemason. Mm-hmm. The original handshakes, now to the best of my knowledge and to the best of the information that I've read, and I've done, a substantial amount of, how I am with research. Mm-hmm. But there were certain handshakes that were given. If you were an apprentice, you only knew the handshake of an apprentice. You were not privy to that next step. So if you went on the job and you had just finished working with another master and you went to another job and you were looking for work, in order to be known as a Mason of repute, of reputation, was to be able to have that handshake that proved that you were part of the guild, that you were a Mason, a worker that was worthy of the trade. So if you went and you moved up the ranks in laying stone and you became a journeyman, you would learn the handshake for a journeyman, so that when you went on to another job, you would be able to walk up to the master there, the master mason on the job, or the journeyman on the job, give him a handshake, and they'd know that by your presence that you were someone who knew what you were talking about and could be put to work immediately. Now, when you got to be a master, you could go anywhere on any job and walk in, and you walked up to another master mason on the job, you would be given your own crew, because they knew right away that in order to get to that level, you knew what you were doing. It wasn't something that you would be fiddling around with. Now, that's not to say that people didn't try and see what the handshakes were so that they could try and get better jobs, but immediately they'd see that, all right, you don't know what you're doing, and unfortunately, during that period of time, things didn't go really well for you if you came up as a fraud.
Yeah, you'd be ousted, I imagine, immediately.
You're probably more than ousted. You're talking about back, 5th century, 6th century, 7th century, where a lot was riding on what you were building. So there were stiffer penalties than, look, you'll never work in this town again, kid.
Yeah. So now we're going to move on to the obvious one, and that would be Freemasonry and religion. Freemasonry is not a religion, correct?
No, we are not a religion. This is the thing that I try and point out to people all the time. If we were a religion, if Freemasonry was a religion, we would have no Jewish Freemasons. We would have no Catholic Freemasons. We would have no Protestant Freemasons. We would have no Muslim Freemasons. We would have no Shinto Freemasons. We'd have none of that. Because it would all boil down to and I've heard this right out of people's mouths. Well, you don't know because you're not high enough in the organization. I pretty much do know that we are not a religious organization.
Well, that's one of the basic tenets you're taught when you become a Freemason. And you're even told that before you become a Freemason, that it's not a place to discuss religion and politics.
No,
because that could lead to bitterness. Yeah.
That's right. Once that door closes, when Lodge is in session, you do not talk religion, and you do not speak politics. When that door is open and Lodge is open, you can do whatever you want. You can carouse and everything else, but once that door closes, it's serious business.
This is something that I was telling somebody earlier. Masons are there to teach knowledge. They'll teach you about things, but they don't teach you what to think.
No. See, this is the other thing that's been brought up time and time and time again. Oh, you guys are, associated with the Illuminati. Well, the group, the Illuminati, was only around for about a year, all told. I think it was more like 17 months or something like that, and they faded away. True enlightenment comes from understanding your surroundings, and the basic tenets of a Mason is the Masons make good men better.
So branching off of that, you also have the situation where you have the person that runs the lodge is known as a worshipful master.
Correct.
And that is not you don't actually worship the worshipful master. No. That's just a sign of respect.
That's it. There is no worshiping going on at all. It's not a church. We don't run a church. The only thing that could be seen as having some religious undertones would be the Book of Enlightenment that every lodge has, which would be if you're a Christian, a vast amount of Christians in a lodge, you'll have a Bible. If there's a vast amount of Jewish in there, you'll have a Torah. If you have a vast amounts of Muslim, you'll have a Quran. It's a focusing point, and it's a place where all men are created equal
and respected equally.
Exactly.
That's another thing that you were taught when you become a Mason, is that you're taught right off the bat that you're a brotherhood and you respect each other equally.
We respect each other equally, and we treat everyone outside of our tenets with the same respect that would be wanted of our own.
Let's move on. We were talking about going into, you had said something that was called the suppression. So we now understand what the basics of where the Masonic lodges came from, the basic backgrounds of what Masonry is, and how some of their traditions and ideals and things like that came along, and what they're taught when you go in to become a Mason. And by the way, if you walk into a Masonic lodge, they have open Masonic lodge nights, and this is a lot of the stuff that they're going to tell you. So we're saving you some time here.
Yeah.
But so let's talk about, you were mentioning the suppression. I know nothing about what the suppression is. So what is a suppression? When did it start? What does it involve? What's it all about?
I don't want to cause any bad blood, but it has to be said, and as we all know, if you ignore history, you're destined to relive it. During the time when the Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic Church was at its strongest, you could not go to any other church. And unfortunately, lodges were seen as churches. It was strictly forbidden for any Catholic man to join a lodge. Now, that's not to say that people didn't break away from the church and decide to join the lodge, because there were things that were beneficial for someone if they joined the lodge. There were, it was a safe haven. You had people around you. There's safety in numbers. Unfortunately, when you have something as powerful as the Catholic Church at the time, the safety in numbers really didn't work out to the benefit. So a lot of the lodges went underground. They went quiet. I don't want to say they went dark, because when a lodge goes dark, that's it. It's over. They go dim. When that whole thing was going on, there were so many people that wanted to join the Freemasons that the Catholic Church decided, well, we need to institute something that we can have for our people that will keep them from trying to join the lodge and run off. And that's where the KFC started up, the Knights of Columbus.
Now,
So
during this time, you also had people, this is where a lot of your alchemists and stuff like that were joining the lodge for purposes of safety. You had your big inventors and your forward-thinking scientific people that were often persecuted by the church. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them were joining the lodge, I would assume, for safety from the church, where they would have a place where they could go and be open with their ideas and not worry so much about persecution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. That's the other problem. When you have a secret society,
everybody was a part of it.
Everybody was a part of it. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, while there are some names that are higher echelon thinkers that have been and are Masons, a lot of times people just tack it on there because it sounds good. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, they just, he was a Mason. He must have been a Mason. Yeah, that's like saying Aleister Crowley was. That's not happening either.
Since we're talking about suppression, give me a couple of examples of things that were going on in this time to push this forward or push it along and, tell people what the suppression was like.
All right. Well, in 1735, Holland banned Masonry. Sweden and Geneva did it in 1738. Zurich did it in 1740, and Born was in 1745. Catholic Spain, Portugal, and Italy also suppressed Freemasonry after 1738. There's also sightings of what are called papal states. It was during the Florentine Inquisition in 1736. From Florence, Italy. There was a lodge, a Masonic lodge in Florence, Italy, that was it was condemned in 1737. So, I mean,
so at this point, you could see why people would go underground and still try to keep the organization going.
Look, in 1738, Pope Clement, the 12th, he prohibited it. So when the Pope says it's bad and you got a bunch of sheeple following, you're like, all of a sudden, you're like the demon seed.
This is where it's time to become a secret society goes into effect, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the reason why is, there were accusations that Freemasons were atheists. So, and at the time, nowadays, atheists are a little more, I don't want to say embraced, but tolerated by religious people. They're like, oh, I'll pray for you, but, whatever. But, then.
Well, I think that also goes against one of the tenets of Masonry, because you have to believe in a higher power.
A higher power, too.
Exactly.
And that's, and that completely goes against, like, the belief that Masons are Satan worshipers, too. Because by all rights, if there were to be a belief in Satan, and that would be a lower deity, then it wouldn't be a higher power.
So now we've got an idea of what the suppression was all about. So from here, we move on to something that me and you have termed as the Exodus, for lack of a better term. And this is where you start having I think is what's the shift in Masonry, where you start having the people that are immigrating to America, and they're bringing Freemasonry with them.
Yeah, whereas immigration started, to North America in like 17. I want to say it was 17th. It's in the 1730s. I can't really give you a real date, but it was in the 1730s that modern lodges were started here in the States. After the American Revolution is when like the Grand Lodge was formed here. The Grand Lodges formed themselves in these states and said, you know what, we don't need England anymore. You guys screwed us over. Here we go.
See, that's another thing that goes back to Masons being a grand secret society that's trying to rule the world. When you had the Civil War going on,
you had brothers fighting each other.
You had the Revolutionary War going on. You had American Masons shooting at English Masons and vice versa.
Yeah, and you had French Masons shooting. You had to realize, though, over in England and Europe, this was going on way before that, because you had English Masons that were shooting at Italian Masons, at French Masons, at Irish Masons. We still kind of have that going on nowadays too. But you have, in essence, we're a brotherhood. We're a fraternity. We're supposed to look at each other as equals. We're all on the level with each other. For that to happen, it was when two countries were under extreme duress, and there's been small blurbs from people of repute that really regretted having to fire upon or attack a fellow brother. But we were a burgeoning country, and we needed to break away. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but it was probably the best thing to happen to Freemasonry here in the States, because it gave us our own identity.
Mm-hmm.
You got to look at Washington was the first Grand Master. He was the first dude.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier too, about the way that Washington looks the way that the state, the District of Columbia looks the way that it does, because so many of the founding fathers were Masons, and so many prominent people.
Architect.
Exactly. And yes, Washington, D.C. is laid out the way that it is for a reason. And when these buildings were built, there was big ceremonies to lay the cornerstones down and things like that.
That's no secret. There's pictures of George Washington in his apron with his jewel in a full Masonic ceremony laying the cornerstone. And there's a Masonic symbol of our compass and square right on that cornerstone. And it's never been hidden. We've never tried to hide it.
No, a lot of this stuff has never been hidden. The stuff that's public is very public.
It's all open. That's the thing. We're not a secret society. We are a society with some secrets. It's the same thing with, you walk into Ford. It's a private business, but it's a public industry. You can't just walk into Ford and say, I want the paperwork for your next car. It's not going to happen.
Do you like comic books, video games, and horror?
Green Lantern. Why the Last Man?
Gotham City Sirens.
Do you want to hear girls talking about comic books, video games, and horror?
Witchblade.
Mass Effect 3. The Boys.
Batgirl Year One.
Birds of Prey.
Tomb Raider.
Artifacts.
Fable.
Zatanna. The Darksiders.
Stop it, Luigi. I hate you.
Then have we got a show for you.
Mainly because it has boobs. I'm just kidding.
Check out the Nerd Girl's Eye View at comicrelated.com.
Oh, they're gonna talk about boobs.
New episodes every Thursday. Also available on iTunes.
All right, so now you've had the division. Let's talk about some of the founding fathers in Masonry here, because now you've branched off from Europe. We're in America. Masons here are more or less on their own, so things had to kind of reset from this point. So let's talk about the founding fathers, Masons. Where do you want to start? You want to start with George Washington?
Well, George Washington's the obvious one. Everybody knows George Washington was a Mason. I'm pretty sure a lot of people know Ben Franklin was a Mason. He was actually the Grand Master of his lodge in 1735.
Now
so
that
he was like
that was the first American lodge, correct?
The first American lodge there were small lodges. The first Grand Lodge Washington was instituted as the Grand Master of that first lodge, and it was in Virginia.
So for practicality purposes, that would be the start of American Freemasonry then.
For all intents and purposes, yeah, that would be where they went from having small little lodges to finally having a Grand Lodge that they could go to.
And call their own.
Well, the Grand Lodge is what answers the questions. It's the overseer for all the smaller lodges.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all the worshipful masters from a lodge go to the Grand Lodge to speak with all the other masters of the lodges to be able to, trade information, see what's working for them, to be able to, bring it back to your lodge and say, well, it works here at such and such a lodge. Let's try it out here.
So that would be more or less where, at that time, where if you wanted to become a Mason, that would be where you would go to learn the rites and learn the tenets and things like that to take them back to start your own lodges off.
Yes, you have to approach a Grand Lodge for that to happen. If you want your own charter and start a lodge, you go to Grand Lodge.
From there, those are the people that built Washington, laid it out the way that it is and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So things are coasting along. You've got Masonry growing around the country in America.
You have people like Sam Adams, Patrick Henry, Francis Scott Keys. There were a lot of other people that may not have been Masons, but definitely had Masonic connections. We know that John Hancock was definitely a Mason. Paul Revere. I mean, there were a bunch of people that were founding fathers that we know were Masons because we have their lodge number, we have their paperwork. There's a paper trail that leads them back to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have my lodge membership. That lodge membership tells what lodge I'm from and whether or not I'm current. And the books tell when I took my degrees.
All right, so everything's rolling along fine. Everything's rolling along fine for Masonry in the United States. It's reestablishing itself here. You've got Masons in the North. You've got Masons in the South. And then you have the Civil War that comes along. And this is what rips the country apart. Now, you would think that you have what happened in Europe where Masons came over to America and then Europe Masonry cut off from America. Now, we were talking before and I'd said, well, how come the Civil War didn't affect the Masons the same way the Revolutionary War did, where you would think, okay, you would have Southern Masons and you would have Northern Masons, but it didn't quite fracture that way. So how did that come about? Because again, you have a situation where you've got Northern Masons shooting at Southern Masons and vice versa, yet it seems like there's still a cohesive body between brothers here at this point.
Well, there still is. That's the thing. That was the juxtaposition that was involved with the Civil War. You had brother fighting brother, blood brother. You also had fraternal brother fighting fraternal brother. But if you got hurt and captured, you kind of got special treatment. I don't want to say that they, didn't. If you had your pin and you had your dues card with you and another brother found you, you'd get a little better treated. They wouldn't see you as a spy, more or less. They wouldn't see you as a spy. They would treat you with the respect that you deserved as a fellow brother. At that point, the line of warfare was transcended by the brotherhood. Is the simplest way to put it. Just because you were fighting each other didn't mean that all bets were off. You wore your pin. On the other side, they wore their pins. They were known to be Masons. There were thousands of Masons at the time that were involved in these skirmishes. I mean, a lot of the information that's passed on is anecdotal, which is going to be that way with anything. You found that in the First World War, the Second World War. There's always anecdotes of someone being treated a certain way. But, there were certain people that did keep the information that they were treated a certain way by such and such a brother from such and such a lodge. And, there's an unspoken respect that is carried, whatever lodge you're from. So there was a way to, I don't want to say guarantee safe passage, because it just wasn't. It was a war. but it didn't fracture the way it did over in England. You know, when we left England, it was a big screw you because we don't want anything to do with you anymore. This was a fight over our own land and in a growing country, in a growing nation, trying to feel our way out. I mean, even when the war ended, I want to think that, you know, brothers knew that this wasn't going to go on forever.
So there also wasn't the fracturing of, say, like rights and tenets and beliefs between lodges. They still maintained those same things.
Absolutely.
Even between North and South.
Your charter was still pulled from of a Grand Lodge that followed the same tenets. You know, if I can go right now, I can go up to Cape Cod, or I can go up to Maine, or I can go down south. I mean, I can go anywhere, literally anywhere in the world, and walk into a lodge and be seen as a brother. In 2012, I can go anywhere as long as I have my dues card and I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I can go to any lodge and walk in and be welcomed as a brother.
They're all covered with filthy germs, aren't they, Smithers?
Why, what do you mean, sir?
Freemasons run the country!
Hi there, folks. I'm Pastor Recoil, and I'm here to share with you a message about
the double bacon rainbow.
Because I like
double bacon rainbow is really all you need to know.
And do you know who else likes bacon? Seder.
I would marry bacon before I'd marry a gay.
Over at the-bunker.net.
Can I just marry a pig? Just its pork belly.
Check out Transmissions from the Bunker at the-bunker.net.
I'm ignoring the new promo because I don't want to make one.
We've covered the Civil War. We've covered how Masons in the Civil War didn't fracture. You guys managed to keep your act together. After the Civil War was over with, you all came up and gave each other the big group hug. And things smoothed over. And then you have this transitional period from then to now, to what Masonry was then now, to what Masonry was back then, to what Masonry is now. I'm sorry, the Monster Energy drink is beginning to wear off. We're more or less referring to it as the branching. So Masonry back then, how did it go to become what it is now? Because now you've got so many offshoot groups of Masonry. And I was saying you have something called the branching. And when did that start? And you were saying it's kind of always been there. It's always been something that's been happening since way back when.
Yeah, so, there's different branches of Masonry that one can choose once they've achieved a Master Mason. You can either go Scottish Rite or you can go York Rite. Those are the two main branches of Masonry. And even within those branches, there are sub-branches. Well, let's start with York Rite. You've got York Rite is Mark Master, Past Master, Most Excellent Degree, Royal Arch Degree, Royal Master Degree, Select Master Degree, Super Excellent Master Degree, Illustrious Order of the Red Cross, there's the Red Cross, Order of Malta, and then the Order of the Temple. And that's where Commandery is in the Knights Templar. Let's just talk about the Knights Templar, because these are the guys that have all the romanticism to them. These are the guys you see in the Indiana Jones movies. These are the guys that you see, and I think they're the ones that are a national treasure. What's the deal with the Knights Templar? Now, are these guys really the protectors of the sacred biblical relics? There's a lot of speculation as to where the Knights Templar came from. The real Knights Templar were a group of militant knights that were part of the church that would help people with safe passage to the Holy Land, to and from the Holy Land. You gave them your property, you gave them your money, they gave you safe passage to and from the Holy Land. They got really strong and really powerful at one point, and they had a lot of money. They had at one point more money than the church. And the church started looking at it like, wait a minute. If we're supposed to be the most powerful, now mind you, this is during the Inquisition. If we're supposed to be the most powerful, why are these cats soaking up all the power? Why are these cats soaking up all the money? And they became a very large militant group. So, the Pope didn't like what was going on. So they said, hey, we're going to bastardize these guys, and we're going to make them look bad. And we're going to imprison all of them and start killing them off. And then we'll take all of their money and all their property and make them go away. Now, the Knights Templar are still around to this day, correct? The Masonic order, yes. Okay. And it's like paying homage to what the Knights Templar did during that period of time. They gave safe passage, and in essence, they gave their life to the protection of Christ, if you're a Christian. And, much the same as anybody who would be a Christian in the lodge. If you're a Christian and you're of a Christian lodge, meaning that there's the majority of the people in your lodge are Christian, you would be considered, someone. I mean, it's pomp and circumstance, but there are some really big tenets to it that are really important to that. If you're a member of the Knights Templar, you take it really seriously. You're a member of the Commandery. You're a member of the militant organization. You are. What is the Commandery? Commandery is the militant branch of Masonry.
Okay.
Which is wicked cool. They're the ones that you see that have like the skull and crossbone on their patches and their badges. They also have the crown with the red cross through it. The symbol of the trowel. There's a whole bunch of different symbols that go along with commandery that are like wicked cool.
So let's move on to the Scottish Rite, because the Scottish Rite, this is kind of funny. You were talking to me off the air about this, that it's actually a French rite, but it's referred to as the Scottish Rite.
It has its roots in Scotland or France, and This is the primary. This is more or less considered the primary European branch. Am I correct on that, or would that be the York Rite? Or this is a combination of both? It's a combination of both. It depends on who you talk to. This is the older order.
Okay.
Of it, because it goes from Master Mason all the way up to 32nd degree, and then the honorary degree. So I mean, it goes from the 4th degree all the way up to 32, and there's all different levels. They're not really levels. I was just saying they're levels.
By degree.
The highest level that you can achieve in the Mason's order is a Master Mason.
Okay.
Everything after that is a lateral move. Because in order to become a provost and judge, you have to be a Master Mason. In order to join the shrine, you have to be a Master Mason. In order to be part of commandery, you have to be a Master Mason.
Okay, but by saying these levels, these are more or less levels. We'll go with lack of a better term, levels of knowledge and levels of achievement within the organization for things that you've done within the organization, correct?
Sure,
This isn't like I was talking to you off the air. This isn't like you walk into – this isn't like World of Warcraft where you create a character and you walk into the Masonic Lodge and there you have the honorable master, worshipful master sitting there with a question mark floating above his head, and he gives you Masonic quests to go out and you gain experience points and then you ding up a level as a Mason.
How great would that be?
Your first quest would be going out and getting sandwiches for the rest of the lodge. You know,
I would not come back. I'd be full, but I wouldn't come back.
But these levels are more or less just conferences of trust and more knowledge and how things work within the organization.
Absolutely.
Your understanding of rituals and things like that, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is going to lead me to the question: what in the world is the 33rd degree, and what is the big conspiracy about level 33 and all these things? Because when somebody says this guy is a 33rd degree Mason, the mythology to it is that you're the guy that knows what's going on with the master plans to take over the world.
No, okay. The best way to describe it before I actually tell you what it is it's like a good merit badge for being a good Mason.
You're Mason of the Year, essentially.
Pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. It's an honorary degree. It can only be bestowed on you if it is requested. It is denied immediately. It will be refused.
Hey, about that 33rd degree.
Exactly. You can't. Everybody's like, oh, that person is, 33rd degree Mason. He knows everything that's going on. Okay, if what he knows that's going on is that he's a good person and trying to make people around him and his stuff better, then sure, he knows what's going on. He knows the rules.
Yeah, because you also get this impression that, like, if you're the 33rd degree Mason, that you're the Chuck Norris of Masonry.
Oh, Chuck Norris.
Like you're gonna pop up looking like Chuck Norris with your apron on and start dropping wicked Mason kung fu.
Sure, absolutely. But yeah, it's not it's the title of it is Inspector General Honorary. Mm-hmm. And it's the 33rd degree is conferred by the Supreme Council upon members of the Rite in recognition of outstanding work in the Rite or in public life. That's it. There's nothing mythical about it. There's nothing mystical about it. These aren't the guys that are running the world. These are probably the guys that are sitting over in the Shriners Hospital helping out.
That leads me to the next one, which is the Shriners. And these are the guys that you normally see in the parades driving around the little tiny cars with the fezzy hats.
Yeah, I have my father-in-law, my grandfather-in-law's fez. My mother-in-law gave it to me because I'm the only Mason in the family right at the moment. Other than
these
my
guys
uncle.
Are cool. This is one of the aspects of Masonry that doesn't get, in my opinion, enough attention, because really most people only know of Shriners as the guys that drive around in the parades with the fez hats on. Mm-hmm. And when you say, oh, yeah, my grandfather's a Shriner, and they go, you mean the guy with the fez hats that drive around the little cars in the parade?
Yeah, that's what the guys that drink too much and drive around little cars?
Yeah. And I think that they're really cool because these are the guys that have the Shriners hospitals, and they primarily handle burn cases for children, things like that. And if you're a child and you're taken to a Shriners hospital, there is never a charge. They don't charge for their services, which is a really cool selfless act. It takes a lot of money to do these kinds of things, to run a whole hospital like that.
Yeah, it's not cheap, and it's done on donation, and it's done on time. People go and they donate their time, and they donate money, and the Shriners hospitals are pretty miraculous in and of themselves. I mean, for a group of supposedly beer swilling people on tiny little cars with funny hats, they do a lot of good. They do a lot of good.
They're also the guys that run the circuses and things like that.
Yeah, sure. But, I mean, there's face painters, and there's the carousels. They're about, the Shrine is about having a good time. It's about being serious but having a good time. And the Shriners are well known for being the jokesters of the group, and with all right. They're the ones that on one side you have the commandery, which are very very straight-laced, very militant, not in a bad way, but in a military order. You
have the Knights Templar, which are the holier division of the groups.
Well, that's part of commandery. That's what you would have.
And then you have the Shriners.
The Shriners. They're the guys who are like, yeah, we do great stuff, but we're gonna have a little fun. They're in places called grottos, and my uncle-in-law is actually potentate for the grotto out in Indiana that he belongs to.
What is potentate?
It's the guy in charge.
Okay.
It's the guy in charge. It's like worshipful master. But
now,
the potentate is the dude in charge.
I was asking you something off the air, which now makes a lot of sense, because every time I've ever seen the Shriners driving in little cars with the fez hats on, they're always the older gentlemen, always referred to as my grandpa or my uncle. And the reason why, now that you said it, makes sense is because you can't just simply go and become a Shriner. You can't just go into the Shriner building like you can with being a Mason. You can't just walk in and say, hi, I'd like to become a Shriner. You can't do that because
you have to be a Master Mason, and you have to have gone through your degrees.
So you can't just, if you're a Master Mason.
I can't just go like, I'm a Master Mason and I want to become a Shriner now. Boom. You can't do it. Yeah. That's not the way it works. I mean, there are certain things you can't do to expedite that. There's workshops. There's stuff that can be done to move you along, but it still takes time. It's not something that, hey, I'm a Mason and tomorrow I'm going to be a Shriner. Not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Having once identified a Mason, immediate steps must be taken to isolate him from the general public. Having accomplished that, it is now possible to cure him of these unfortunate Masonic tendencies through the use of behavioral psychotherapy. In this treatment, the patient is rewarded for the correct response and punished for the wrong one. Let us begin. Would you like to give up being a Mason? Think carefully. Think. No.
No!
All right, so now let's talk about some of the more modern day branches of Masonry, because it's more than just Masons at this point. You have Masons that have families and kids and wives and things like that. So let's talk about some of the modern side branches from Masonry.
Well, there's this little group of people called the Boy Scouts. Well, the Masons have a group like that too. We have the Demolay. That's the boys branch, and it cuts out at the age of 18. So from the age of, I believe it starts off at like 6. I want to say 6. It might be a little younger than that, but to 18. And then you do things like you go to camp, and you do pretty much the same thing you would as a Boy Scout. And it's to try and get you to a point where your next move would be to become a Mason. There's only one problem. It stops at 18, and you cannot become a Mason until you're 21. So there's 3 years there of what am I supposed to do now? And there's been a lot of talk within the ranks of why don't we move it to 18? If you can take a bullet for your country and you're old enough to vote and you're old enough to gamble as far as like scratch tickets and lotto, why is there that branch, that gap in between? And the only thing right now I think that's holding it back is the drinking age, because there is some drinking that can take place at a lodge outside of when lodge is in session. We have our dinners and stuff like that, and there may be drinking, and we don't want underage drinking. It's not something that we follow. But there has been, as of recent years, a move to try and move that age back to 18, so that when there's not that 3-year gap, because that's where we lose some of our Masons. If you're brought up from a little boy all the way up, you already know all the tenets that you're supposed to know. So it would be next step to becoming a Mason. You would already have someone that was primed, that understood some of the tenets, to be able to just step right in. And I don't want to say make a better Mason, but someone that has a little more information than the man on the street would have. And then we have, for the girls, there's the Rainbow Girls, which is like the Girl Scouts. And they do little pageants, and they do what Girl Scouts do. And then there's the all-powerful Order of the Amaranth, or the Eastern Star. And that is the Wives of the Masons. And they have been linked to a lot of really good movements in the United States as being helpful to help things along. And it's, they're not female Masons.
That's a bone of contention. This is kind of a funny bone of contention. Well, it's not really a bone of contention between me and you, but Masonry is not allowed for women. Women are not allowed to be Masons. Is there a particular reason for that, or is it just a sexist thing, or what's the thing with that? Is there a decent answer?
Fraternal order. It's a fraternal order. It's for men.
Okay.
I don't want to sound like a chauvinist pig.
Liar. But go ahead.
I have 3 daughters and a wife. I can't really afford to be a chauvinist. But it's a fraternal order. It was for the men. And I'm not knocking on the door to get into a Curves. I don't care. I'm not knocking on the door of any of the. I don't want to join a female organization. If that's what they want, that's fine.
I brought this up because, of course, I'm going to bring up Elizabeth St. Ledger. And she is reportedly one of the few female Masons that was made an honorary female Mason. Now, there's a big bone of contention about that. I've noticed among Masons that it's one of those things. It's like, well, you grudgingly either profess to it, or it's always like, well, that's still up for debate.
It is. It is still up for debate.
Well, I'm going to read a little piece here about her.
You do it, and then I'll fire back at you.
Elizabeth St. Ledger, Aldworth, Ireland, around 1710. The prototype of women Freemasonry is Elizabeth St. Ledger, daughter of Arthur St. Ledger, Viscount Doneraile of Ireland. I believe I'm saying that properly. The evidence points to her story being true. Elizabeth was born in 1693, and events occurred when she was a young girl. Generally agreed to be around 1710 when she was about 17. This was before the Grand Lodge of Ireland was formed and formal regulations for Masonic lodges were established. Her father was an enthusiastic Mason and held lodge meetings at his home. The time of the events was before the formation of any Grand Lodge, so the lodge couldn't have a charter and probably met irregularly when it was convenient for the members. One evening, the lodge was initiating a new member, and Elizabeth was in an adjacent room. Because of the uncompleted construction on this separating wall, she was able to remove a brick and witness the ceremonies. When she arrived to slip away, she was discovered. When she tried to slip away, she was discovered, and the Masons pondered what to do to preserve their secrets. Their solution was to initiate Elizabeth and thus impose on her obligation of Masonic secrecy. Over the years, various details have been embroidered into the story, but the details here are common to all versions. Supporting the story are some interesting facts. Elizabeth, later Mrs. Richard Aldworth, is listed as the second subscriber after the Grand Master of Ireland to fulfilled. Now here comes another crazy word. This Agnes 1744 serious and impartial inquiry into the cause of present decay Freemasonry in the Kingdom of Ireland. I have no idea what the hell that run-on sentence means. When the local Masons held benefits for the poor, she attended in Masonic regalia. There is a painting of her wearing a Masonic apron, and her apron is on display at the Masonic Hall, Tuckey Street in Cork, Ireland. So basically, she was sticking her head in, watching the rituals go down, and then she realized she was in too deep, and she tried to escape, and as the story goes, the doorman caught her, and she screamed, and they all come running out, and it was become obvious that she had seen the I think that's pretty cool. I know a lot of people don't agree with that, but I think it's pretty cool because she appears, from everything that I've read on her, she appears to have worn the title with dignity and kept to her end of the bargain. She lived up to the credence of being a Mason. Now, this isn't something that happens all the time. So that's not another, I can't understand why people are freaking out, but,
Well, there's a reason why people are freaking out. First of all, her father was a Mason, which that's fine. But he was holding lodge in his house.
Well, they didn't have a place to hold it at the time.
He didn't have a charter either, so he wasn't even recognized by the Grand Lodge. So technically, he was holding lodge without consent from the Grand Lodge. This is how all those little spin-off groups happen.
So
technically, she's a Mason only by right of who the people she hung around with were.
So should they have just cut off her head and eliminated the problem on the spot, or?
I'll tell you what. If this had happened in an English lodge and it had its charter and the father allowed it to happen, he would no longer be a member of the lodge.
So what should have rectified the situation other than her being made an honorary Mason to keep her mouth shut?
There really wasn't anything that could have been done. Unfortunately, there really wasn't anything that could have been done. There are things in place now that make sure that'll never happen again. I can tell you that. I can tell you that with as much certainty as I am a male.
Oh, okay.
There's certain things that you have to go through that will prove without a shadow of a doubt that you are not a female.
Fred, Betty and I have decided we don't want to go to your lodge meetings after all.
Now you're showing sense, Wilma. Women just don't belong at lodge meetings. In fact, no woman has ever set foot inside our lodge hall and never will.
Good for you, Fred. Well, I'm going to bed.
Good night, Wilma, darling.
Good night, Fred. And a happy ack-ack-a-dack to you.
Thank you, sweetheart. Hey, that's our secret password. Wilma, where did you learn that?
Oh, we have ways of finding things out.
Now that we've covered all that fun stuff, is this where you get groups like Moose Lodge and...
Well, that's the thing. There's a whole bunch of things that spun off of this. I mean, you got to realize that...
At what point does it become silly? Do you have like the Flintstones with the Fraternal Order of Water Buffalo?
Yeah. That's where do you think that came from? There were so many fraternal orders that started up. I mean, there was a certain bend of life that was necessary to be a Mason, especially in New England. And then there was like, well, if I can't be a Mason, then I'll show you. And you'll get lodges like the Lions Club and the Moose Lodge. And well, the Moose Lodge is a family-oriented lodge.
Yeah, so we've got one right around the corner from us.
Yeah, we do too. It's a lot of fun. They have little events and stuff. But I mean,
oh, look at them! Aren't they cute?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I don't want to sound condescending because this is the farthest thing I want to be. I mean, we have pig roasts and everything else, but the Masons were like that. That was it. They were the first. They were the first, and then all these other groups spun off. Fraternal orders spun off from that. I mean, even Skull and Bones, the Yale group, and a lot of the people that were in Skull and Bones happened to be Masons or were associated with the Masons. Doesn't mean they, were Masons, but they were associated with it.
See, this brings me back around to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. I don't think that the Masons are actually out there trying to rule the world. I do believe very strongly that people that do run the world and do make policy and things happen behind the scenes happen to be Masons. And, and that's the kind of thing that's going to happen when you have that power groups of people that are getting together and meeting in these groups and things like that. These kinds of things are going to happen when you're put into a group of people like that. But do I think the Masons sit down and say, all right, we're the Masons and we're going to rule the world? I just don't. It doesn't add up to, if you're a secret society that's going to try to do these kind of things, you don't put yourself out into the public like that. Now, there is also the response, well, lower level Masons wouldn't know these kinds of things. Well, I guess I can see that argument, but it would just seem like a lot more to make more sense where you have foundations like the Bilderbergs and things like that, or, if there are going to be organizations like that, you're not going to know about them. It's like Masons, you guys have license plates on your car. You've got Shaquille O'Neal with his big giant ring on TV. You're very much out there in the public, and you have open lodge nights. That was one of the things we were talking about. You're not allowed to petition people to be a Mason, but you put it out there very publicly that, hey, we're looking for people. If you would like to be a Mason, ask one. We're open to have you come in to become a Mason. It's not something that you're trying to hide from people.
Okay, you ready? Okay, we're going to do this right now. These are the lists of people that we know for a fact were Masons and presidents of the United States. Are you ready? George Washington, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, James Polk, James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, James Garfield, William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, Howard Taft, Warren Harding, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and Gerald Ford. That's it.
That we know of.
No, that's it.
That we know of.
See, now here, I'm going to read this too. George Bush was also on numerous occasions been referred to as a Mason. The confusion as to the President Bush being a member arises from the swearing-in ceremonies at his inauguration. President Bush took his oath of office on the George Washington Bible, which belongs to the St. John's Lodge in New York City. Because the Bible belonged to a Masonic lodge, many writers assumed he was a Freemason. The Bible was used as a request of the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies. This Bible was first used on April 30th, 1789 by the Grand Masters of the Masons in New York to administer the oath of office to George Washington, the first president. Other presidents who took their oath of office on this Bible were Warren G. Harding, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and Jimmy Carter. He is not a Mason.
I believe, to the best of my knowledge, that he was also a member of the Skulls.
Skull and Bones.
Yeah, Skull and Bones. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, quite a lot of people were
Yale.
members of Skull and Bones. Yeah, Yale, that's what it is.
It's right around the corner from here. It's about a 20-minute drive from here.
Well, I guess that's our episode on Masonry. I hope we haven't bored people.
I just hope I did a service to my brothers.
I wanted to be more comical about this, but I just couldn't do it tonight.
I want to state for the record that the amount of people that are Masons that you have no idea they're hilarious people. I mean, we're not staunch. I mean, just listen to me, for God's sakes. The guy who brought me into the Masons, who was like a father to me. He was a knucklehead. He had the greatest sense of humor. My fellow brothers in Lodge have the greatest sense of humor. We're not out to rule the world. I wish I could emphasize that more. We're just not. If we are, then we're moving real slow.
Yes. Yes.
real
You're
slow.
Taking your time.
It's a slug walk.
Well, I think that'll do it for all this hootenanny, fun, wacky Mason shenanigans.
Like I said, I just hope that I did a service to my fellow brothers and I didn't bring shame upon the Masonic name.
We've been recording this show for like 4 hours.
It feels like 9. Oh my God.
Oh, all right, folks. This is Rojan. Peace out from the D.
This is Lobo from Connecticut, and I am known as the not so evil Master Mason.
Fire! Sorry. Peace, folks.
Peace.
Collecting names of the lovers that went wrong. The lovers that went wrong. chasing visions of our futures. One day we'll reveal the truth.